Hey guys, welcome back. Last time we talked about the bones in our ankle and our foot, and this is going to be our last lecture. We're going to go through joints, a couple of diseases, some changes with age, and we're going to be in good shape. So let's go ahead and knock this chapter out. We've been in it a long time. Let's finish it up here. So joints are articulations where one bone meets another bone, and we can classify joints by the type of movement. There are joints which really don't move at all. There are joints which will move just a little, and there are joints that are very, very free in their movement. And so we classify them by either the way they move or the type of tissue. And the type of tissue that binds them together can be fibrous, connective tissue, cartilaginous, or synovial. And we'll look at each of these. So the first we're going to look at is fibrous. And so here they give us the example of the sutures in our skull. And these sutures are a place where there used to be a lot of connective tissue when we were developing little, babies. And as that bone grew, it eventually formed pretty much the bone is touching the bone. And all we have is this tiny, tiny, almost completely unnoticeable layer of really tough fibrous CT. And it's not really going to allow us to move really at all. You can't really move the bones of the skull. But that joint does still exist. So that's called a fibrous joint. The next one is cartilaginous. Cartilaginous is going to give you a little bit of movement, more so than the suture, more so than this fibrous one here will, but it's not going to be super flexible. So where your ribs connect with your sternum through that cartilage, they'll move a little, but not a lot. The symphysis pubis, the pubic symphysis, where the two pubic bones meet, those are really not going to have a lot of flex in them. And of course, our intervertebral discs here, they'll flex just a little for you to kind of bend and move your spine, but they're not really going to move that much. So a little bit of movement, lots of support, and you're going to have a lot of fibrocartilage and a little bit of hyaline cartilage to give you that blend of strength and a little tiny bit of flexibility. And then finally we have synovial. Synovial, think all the joints you can move, knees and elbows and wrists and fingers, that kind of stuff. That's free movement. These are structurally quite a bit more complex than the other two. The other two that we looked at were really just two bones meeting with some connective tissue kind of sandwiched in between. And with a synovial joint, it's really not like that at all. You're probably going to see tendons and ligaments crisscrossing all around the joint. You're going to see a pocket of fluid inside that lubricates the movement of that joint. And so we can call that the joint capsule. That's the ligaments and the synovial membrane around that joint. And then the synovial membrane is actually going to secrete fluid into this space. And here you've got one here and then one here as well, where our knee joint is being formed here. And then you've got some hyaline cartilage around that surface to still give us that flexible but tough feature. And you'll see a lot of these will have a meniscus on them, like your knee, for example, has a meniscus. And that's a little shock-absorbing pad of fibrocartilage on top of that tibia. And then sometimes the synovial membrane will form what's called a bursa, and that's a fluid-filled sac that aids the movement. And there's a bursa, and there's a bursa, and they're full of synovial fluid. And so it's cool because you can run or walk all day. And because you have this cool design with the bone, the cartilage, the hyaline cartilage, and the fluid, and then cartilage around that other bone, you never really get this bone grinding on bone. That would be so painful. You get bone rotating about a fluid, which reduces the friction and makes that joint last a long time. It's very, very good for us. So now we're going to do a tough one. These are types of movements, and these are very important. You've got to learn them, and you've got to remember them for next chapter when we do muscles. And we'll do a Simon Says on this in class because that's a really good way to learn it. But here you have it. There's a lot of different types of movements. The first is flexion versus extension. To flex is to bend, and to extend is to return to the anatomical position. So the simplest one would be, to sit or stand in anatomical position, and to flex your elbow, you bring your hand up to your shoulder, right? To extend your elbow or extend your arm, you would push that wrist back down to anatomical position. That's flexion and extension. Now, there's also one for your foot called dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. To dorsiflex means to stand and raise your ankles so that you would point your toes up towards the sky. And plantar flexion is, I think, to like plant your foot during a jump. When you go to jump, you plantar flex your foot, which means you flex the ankle and you push the ball of your foot down into the ground. The hyperextension is not really one you want to be able to do necessarily. Hyperextension is to extend too far. That's really not a very good thing. And then there's abduction and adduction. So abduction is to lift away from the body. And so if you stand with your arms at your sides, or if you're, of course, sitting and listening to this lecture, if you sit with your arms at your sides and then you lift them up away from you, that's called abduction. I have a dumb way of remembering that, which is if somebody thinks they were abducted by aliens, they were taken away in the night to the UFO, kind of story. If you abduct a limb, you take it away from the body. Cool? So adduction, add is to bring together in math, So adduction would be to bring those arms back together very near the center of your body. So those are two actions that you'll want to know as well. Now, rotation versus circumduction is tricky. It's especially tricky when I'm not standing in front of you in class. Otherwise, I can just, make myself look silly and do all of these. Rotation is to turn. And so if you rotate your arm, you can just turn your arm. As opposed to circumduction, if you try to spin a big circle with your arm, that's circumduction. So those are some differences there. Then we have pronation versus supination. That's really just for the wrist. If you pronate your wrist, you turn your wrists facing up, facing down towards the ground. And if you supinate your wrists, you turn your wrists facing up like you might hold a bowl of soup. And so remember, supination, your palms of your hand are facing you. Pronation, you rotate it so the palms of your hand are facing the ground. And so those are some anatomical terms. Now here's a funny one. Nothing will make you look cooler than doing protraction and retraction. Just take a good look at that. Big fan. Okay, a few different types of movements. Eversion and inversion. If you've ever rolled your ankle in basketball or volleyball or football or whatever, you've probably got an inversion sprain. A lot of kids sprain their ankle with inversion sprains, which means your foot faces how should we say this? The bottom of your foot faces medially towards the middle of your body, and you basically roll your ankle to the outside, if that helps. I can show you this in class. That's an inversion sprain. And this normally happens when you land on some other guy's shoe or something like that, and it turns your ankle to the outside, and it gets all big and puffy and, blah, blah, blah. You guys have done that. And then there's the eversion sprain. It's quite a bit more rare, but eversion, to evert your foot, is to roll your foot laterally. Okay, so this is this lady's left foot. She rolls her foot in, that's an inversion. She rolls her foot out laterally, that's an eversion. Okay, there's two more types of movements that your bones are capable of. Retraction and protraction. To retract the jaw is to pull the jaw back in towards the middle of the body. To protract the jaw is to push your mandible out away from the midline of your body. And so there's your retraction and protraction. You can do it practice it while you're watching your lecture, so all your neighbors can think you're a crazy person. And then we have elevation versus depression. The shoulders, to elevate your shoulders, you would basically shrug your shoulders. Then to depress your shoulders, you would try to push them down. So there's some different types of movements. Cool. So we'll practice those. Lifespan changes. You're going to hit your maximum height sometime before the age of 30. Guys, ballpark on average, you're probably going to stop growing around 21 or 22, probably before then. Girls, you're probably going to stop growing a couple years before them. It's pretty rare to hit those growth spurts really after about, I don't know, 18 years, 19 years. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but by the time you're about 18 or 19, you're about the height you're going to be. For girls, by the time you're about, I don't know, between friends, 17, you're probably about the height you're going to be. Once you hit 30, your calcium levels fall. So if there's a time to drink a lot of milk and build that calcium up with sports and physical fitness and stuff, it'd be now. Calcium levels are going to start to fall at about 30. You're going to actually start to get shorter at about the age of 30. Your bones are going to start to become more brittle with age, and part of that is because your osteoclasts, the cells that break down bone material, are going to start to outnumber and therefore outwork the osteoblasts, or the bone cells that build bone material. That spongy bone as you age is going to start to weaken quite a bit before the compact bone. That compact bone bears a lot of weight, so it's good that that stays there. But that spongy bone is going to start to get quite a bit weaker. The bone loss becomes a lot more rapid once women hit menopause. They're going to start to have pretty active osteoclasts, and because of some hormonal changes, they'll actually wear away their bone a little bit quicker than the guys will. Hip fractures become a little more common with age. As people fall and as those bones become a little less dense, they're going to break a lot easier. And vertebral compression fractures also become more common as those bones become less dense. And so you'll see some of that. There's a variety of reasons for this, and we're going to look at a few diseases that are going to affect a little bit older people and some reasons that these can correlate with these different diseases. The first is osteoporosis. So basically, osteoporosis is you are losing the calcified matrix. And we've talked about how bone is not mostly cell, it's mostly matrix. So saying you're losing calcified matrix is essentially saying the same thing as you're losing bone. And so here we have this really strong, dense, compact bone and this spongy bone. And in a normal bone, the spongy bone's in pretty good shape. As we get to this osteoporosis, or this osteoporotic bone, our compact bone is not quite as strong as it should be. You can see that this ring is thinner than this ring, and the spongy bone permeates quite a bit further towards the periphery, and that spongy bone is actually kind of being eaten away towards the inside. You see this white space, how thin it is, and this white space, how thick it is. They're trying to show you the bone matrix, and as that bone matrix diminishes, these two bones, you could basically experience the same fall, essentially. And this bone might not break when this bone would break because it just literally has less bone material. Statistically, you're going to see this most commonly affecting elderly white females. Sex hormones like estrogen stimulate osteoblasts. And so when these people are young, especially females, and they have higher levels of estrogen, they deposit a lot of bone matrix. But as those levels decrease with age, especially menopause, that bone is going to be formed much more slowly, and it's going to start to be eaten away by osteoclasts, and that's what gets us in the shape that we're in here with this picture on the right. So that's kind of an interesting one. Here's one that's not so fun. This is called osteoarthritis, and it's a degenerative joint disease, which means with time, the joint starts to degenerate or fall apart. As that cartilage becomes thin and rough, you unfortunately break down that, what I was describing as like this beautiful synovial joint a minute ago, with the fluid and the hyaline cartilage and the bones not even touching each other and everything's so smooth. As that breaks down with osteoarthritis, these bones do touch each other. And when you walk and when you move and when you type and when you lift things, the bone surfaces are actually rubbing against each other, which creates friction, which breaks down the cartilage, which creates pain, and it's just not a lot of fun. And then there's rheumatoid arthritis. This is where this joint becomes very inflamed because for some reason or another, your immune system is attacking the cartilage. And I don't know, but here you can see in these joints here for these knuckles, the joint is really, really swollen. And it's causing some shapes of these fingers too to kind of come off at some weird angles. But as those joints become swollen, they're not going to move so well. They're gonna hurt, and this is a hereditary issue here for rheumatoid arthritis. So I think that's pretty close to the end because that's diseases. So I think we can call it a day with that chapter.